anunya udah datang si apa? Sudah.
Dokter Carrie sudah.
Dokter Carrie sudah ada. Ya, oke.
Tadi saya lihat sudah, Prof.
Udah.
Oke, kita mulai, Prof. Bu.
Ya, mulai.
Ya.
Oke.
Oh ya, sih.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Good evening and good morning for some of us here, ladies and gentlemen. Best wishes to all of us. My name is Yelmirani Putri, doctoral student, University of Indonesia. It's precious chance for me to be a master of ceremony on this very special occasion, guest lecture, Tuesday, December 14, 2021. Global strategic direction for nursing and midwifery require national health policies for its implementation at country level. First of all, let's say thanks to God Almighty for blessing and graces so we can attend and participate in this great event. The Honorable Dean of Health Faculty of Nursing, University of Indonesia. The Honorable all of faculty members of University Indonesia. The Honorable all participants and all invited guests. The Honorable and respectfully our special guest, Dr. Carrie F. McCarthy, RNMPH, PhD, SWHO HQ Technical Officer, Nursing Midwifery Department of Health System Policies and Workforce. Thank you and welcome. Great audience, before we start this event, let's pray according to trust respectively. May God make this event will run smoothly and conducive. Ladies and gentlemen, before we enter the main part, I will read the agenda on this guest lecture as follows. First, the opening session. Second, welcoming speech by Dean Faculty of Health, University of Indonesia. Guest lecturer by Dr. Carrie F. McCarthy. Question and answer session, closing, and video performance. Before we come to the first agenda, I would like to deliver the safety induction of meeting. In accordance with the occupational health and safety regulations in the University of Indonesia, we will deliver safety induction. First, the event uses the Zoom or YouTube application and held in respective venues. Participants are expected to pay attention to visibility of your PC, laptop, or mobile devices. Participants are expected to pay attention to the ergonomic comfort of sitting position during the event. Pay attention to electrical hazard in charger cables or switches around you. Maintain health during the COVID-19 pandemic. For participants who witness it either together, make sure the distance are safe and use a mask. Then the last, make sure the adequacy of internet and internet visibilities to follow online activities until completion and enjoy this event. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the first agenda. Welcoming speech from Dean of Health Faculty, Indonesia, University of Indonesia, Mr. Agus Setiawan SKP, MNDN, time is yours.
Baik, good evening everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening professors, faculties, students, Faculty of Nursing University of Indonesia, and good morning to Dr. Carrie McCarthy from WHO. First of all, on behalf Faculty of Nursing University of Indonesia, I would like to welcome you to Faculty of Nursing University Indonesia. Unfortunately, we cannot see in person, but hopefully in the near future, you can come to our faculty here in Indonesia. We feel very grateful and indeed an honor for us to have you with us this evening to share with us in the issues regarding the global strategic direction for nursing and midwifery. Before start with the session, kindly allow me to briefly introduce our faculty, Faculty of Nursing Universitas Indonesia. So FONUI is the first Faculty of Nursing in the country. We have just celebrated our 36th anniversary last month in November. So at the moment, we have about 1,100 students, consisting of undergraduate students and also postgraduate students. So the participants who come in this public lecture are mostly postgraduate students. They're coming from master specialists and also doctoral students. So they are aiming to be the leader in nursing practice and nursing education here in the country. And Faculty of Nursing Universitas Indonesia has a very close collaboration with WHO. Some of our staff had some secondment to work in the WHO country office, including myself back in 2008 and until 2010. At that time, I served as the National Professional Officer for the Nursing Midwifery Human Resource for Health. And Professor Ahiriani is also the one who very actively engaged in some WHO research. And tomorrow she's going to share her research in the regional meeting among WHO collaborating center in the region. And I'd like to let you know that at the moment, Faculty of Nursing Universitas Indonesia is applying for the WHO collaborating center for Southeast Asia region. So tomorrow will be the meeting, and the 22nd of this December, we're going to have a meeting with the technical officer at the CEARO, Ms. Ai Tanimizu. So hopefully our proposal will be reviewed and accepted, and we kindly ask your support if you heard about our application to the WHO Collaborating Center. So thank you very much again for sharing with us the knowledge. I guess this is not only about sharing knowledge and information about global strategic policy, but also it is a very good beginning to have closer relationship between WHO and also Faculty of Nursing Universitas Indonesia. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you to Mr. Agus for the welcoming speech. Next, we come to the photo session, led by operator. Ms. Ravita, please.
Thank you, Nurse Yelmi, for giving me the chance to take a documentation for this photo session. For all the participants, please kindly turn on your camera so that we can see your beautiful face that will be documented on this guest lecture. With me, there are 9 slides, so make sure that you're always smile while I'm capturing the Zoom, because I don't know whether you're in the first slide, second slide, or the other slides. Okay, I will begin. First slides. 1, 2, 3. Second slide. 1, 2, 3. Third slide. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Okay, I've been finished to take a documentation. Give the moment back to Nurse Yelmi.
Okay, thank you, Nurse Ravita, for the nice picture. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the main part. The session will lead by Professor Afriani S. Hamid, MN, DNST. So now the global strategic direction for nursing and midwifery require national health policies for its implementation at country level by Dr. Carrie F. McCarthy, RNMPH, PhD, WHO HQ Technical Officer, Nursing and Midwifery Department of Health System Policies and Workforce. So our moderator this evening is Prof. Kiriani S. Hamid, MN, DNSC. She is a professor. She is the chair of the World Professor Faculty of Nursing, University of Indonesia. And she is also a president of Indonesia National Nurse Association. So, Professor Afriani, time is yours.
Thank you, Miss Yelmi Reni Putri. She's one of our doctoral students.
Thank you,
And
Prof.
very good evening, especially for our honorable guest lecturer, Dr. Carrie McCarthy, RN, MPH, and PhD. And we have with us the Dean. Thank you for the opening speech. And also that we will be going up to the time as scheduled. So Dr. Carrie McCarthy, we are really honored, to have you with us. And I would allow me to read your brief CV. So Dr. Carrie McCarthy is a technical officer in the Health Workforce Department at the World Health Organization headquarters. In this role, Dr. McCarthy served as WHO technical lead on the International Year of the Nurse and Midwife, the States of the World's Nursing 2020. We are familiar to that. The State of the World's Midwifery 2021, and the Global Strategic Direction for Nursing and Midwifery 2021 to 2025, which was adopted with a resolution at the 74th World Health Assembly. Dr. McCarthy is a registered nurse. She has a PhD in nursing and global health from the University of Washington and master's degree in public health from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. McCarthy has published numbers of research articles, has been invited speakers at different forums, and received many awards and honors. As you can see in what it is put in the, what is it? Please welcome Dr. Carrie McCarthy, our guest lecturer on Global Strategic Direction for Nursing and Midwifery, required national health policies for its implementation at country level.
Thank you, Professor Yanni, and thank you so much to the Dean and to the faculty here. It's really exciting for me to be here with you. I'm honored to be able to participate in this event. And thank you for the introduction, Professor Yanni. I have a slide set that we can go through, and then we can hopefully have lots of time for questions and discussion about all kinds of nursing workforce issues. So I'm going to share my screen. And then
I think you have been set as a co-host, right?
Yes, it looks like I can share my screen. I think, do you see it? Do you see my slide set now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
great.
Okay, so I was just going to start with a little bit of background about WHO. In terms of it being a United Nations non-political organization specialized in health in 1948. And we have 194 member countries, and we have 6 regional offices. This is the headquarters in Geneva, but there are 6 regional offices and over 150 country offices that we work through all those levels. And the primary roles of WHO I put here on the right: to provide leadership on critical health matters, to generate and disseminate health-related knowledge, to set norms and standards and monitor their implementation, to develop and articulate evidence-based policy options, where needed, provide direct technical support or capacity building in countries, and of course, monitor health situations and trends and communicate that to the world, which is something that WHO has been doing a lot in the spotlight lately with the COVID-19 pandemic. And WHO is governed through 2 main mechanisms. There is an executive board, a smaller group that decides the agenda for for the World Health Assembly, the resolutions that the Assembly will consider. And then the main governance body is the World Health Assembly. And that is the representatives from all the member states, there's the ministers of health and the delegation that gathers either in person. You can see these pictures are from before the pandemic, either in person or virtually, to decide on critical health matters. They'll consider resolutions, reports, and decide to take actions. So that happens once a year, usually in May, unless there are special sessions, which there are sometimes. And the executive board meets twice a year. I mention that because the executive board and the World Health Assembly will come up a little bit later in terms of some of the exciting governance and policy action on nursing that's been in the last few years. So I'm sure you all are familiar with the Sustainable Development Agenda for 2030. There are 17 interrelated goals. And I say interrelated because we think of them as progress in one goal, whether it be health, education, gender equality, decent work, or environmental issues or water issues. They're all interrelated. So if we can make progress in one, we're probably going to be making progress in other ones as well. And WHO is the lead agency for advancing progress on goal number 3, which is good health and well-being. So we're the lead agency on coordinating and accelerating progress on SDG 3. And how we do that is essentially, we have our own internal goals called the triple billion goals, and they are shown on the left side here. So the goals, the 3 goals are essentially around universal health coverage, which I'll talk a bit more about. And that means there's 1 billion more people benefiting from health coverage. And these are goals through 2023. The second goal is about health emergencies, that 1 billion more people are better protected from health emergencies. So that's both detection and response capabilities for emergencies. And the last billion, we say, is about 1 billion more people enjoying better health. So under this billion is more things that are not directly health, but impact health. So this could be road safety and environmental aspects and that sort of thing. And so we develop these, WHO develops these internal outcomes and outputs that we measure to see how we're doing in reaching the triple billion goals. So one of the ones that I work on is outcome 1.1, which is improved access to health services. And one of the outputs we measure is whether or not countries are able to strengthen their health workforce. And this is a really important issue because there's about a shortage of around 18 million health workers. And it's a shortage estimated based on the minimum amount of services that would have to be offered for countries to achieve universal health coverage and to meet those and the other health-related SDGs. So calculating that with some, I'm going to get into it later if the students are interested. How we calculated that relates to being able to provide the basic health services for UHC, and there's a shortage of about 18 million through 2030, and the gaps are not equally distributed. The biggest gaps are in low and lower middle income countries, and some of this we'll talk about a little later, but some of this is definitely impacted by migration issues, which is part of the reason that I got contacted with Professor Yanni in the first place, because it's a really large issue that impacts our ability to even make sure that countries can provide a minimum of health services to their populations. So I want to talk a little bit more about what universal health coverage means, because this is something that we have so much global and political agreement about. Not only has it been a priority of the World Health Organization, all the member states of the World Health Organization, but also the UN General Assembly adopted a large agreement on universal health coverage, and so did all of the governments of the UN at the All-Parliamentary Union. So everyone really has this consensus around universal health coverage, and that it is a main goal that we need to achieve globally. And what it means is that essentially 3-4 main things: that all people can access good health services, and that the quality of those health services is enough that if you're accessing them, you have some benefit. It's helping to improve your health. And importantly, that accessing the services does not cause you financial hardship. And so one of the main vehicles for achieving universal health coverage is through strengthened primary healthcare services. And we know to have strong healthcare services, you need, as a cornerstone of universal health coverage, is that you need an adequate number of health workers. Those health workers have to have the right skills and the right combination of skills across the health worker mix. And they need to be distributed. They need to be working in the right places, especially the places that they're needed most. And they need to be adequately supported and motivated and have the resources to do their job in a setting that is safe. Safe and supportive. And we often cite the decent work agenda from the International Labor Organization, which describes the elements of a decent work environment. So these are the things that we are striving for, that there's clear global consensus on. And so from our side, from WHO, we think, how do we operationalize this and how do we support countries to achieve this? And so for the health workforce itself, I wanted to point out three really key documents. One is the Global Strategy for Human Resources for Health, for the health workforce. This was developed shortly after the Sustainable Development Agenda was released. So this is really about how the health workforce can help us achieve UHC. So this is our overarching document. And then the nursing and midwifery is a part of this document, but we also have now a special strategy for nursing and midwifery, but it aligns and falls under this health workforce one. And the health workforce one focuses on improving the quality of the health workforce, on actually the policies that to support all health workers themselves to optimize their contributions to UHC. The second one is about building capacity in the health work, institutional capacity in countries. The third arm of the global strategy for human resources for health is around investment, driving investments in the health workforce. So creating those, having enough jobs, supporting the educational approaches and the working conditions and the regulation and all of those things. And the fourth is about data, having health workforce data so countries can plan, they can understand the dimensions of their health workforce, and they can plan and forecast and make sure that they can see the distribution and where health workers are in the countries. So that's our overarching policy framework, is in the global strategy. Now, in a year later, when we were realizing that to fill that gap of 18 million health workers, we really needed some strong and some robust information about how and where to invest. And we started looking at the evidence. Actually, a commission set up by the former Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General for the United Nations, set up a commission to look at investments in health workers. And they found that if you're investing in jobs of health workers and education of health workers, and we know that around 70% of health workers are women, that you actually can, by increasing the number of health workers, improving their education and improving their working conditions, if you're putting money into that, which is often been what governments consider a cost. Health workers could be considered expensive, and they're a main input into building, your health system. So lots of times countries would, that was where you cut costs, was in your health workers. But this evidence showed when you actually flip that thinking and you're putting money into health workers, their employment and their education, you're actually able to improve not only health, which is SDG 3, but you're also then improving the education systems, and education is SDG 4. And you're also increasing the employment of women, so the economic participation of women, which is as the gender equality is SDG 5. And also you're improving working conditions. And that's SDG 8, which is inclusive growth for everyone and decent work. So some really key evidence about the benefits of investing in health workers. And then shortly after that, we had our monitoring report to see how countries are doing with and how WHO is doing supporting countries to achieve universal health coverage. And while this report found that there was progress being made, there were actually some really large gaps still in low and middle income countries, that there are lots of countries being left behind. And a lot of that was due to access of health workers. So we saw that we had all this really strong evidence of the benefit of investing in health workers, but that we still weren't getting there in terms of the investment needed to achieve UHC. And that was a main reason why countries wanted to do, we're focusing on, for example, nurses and midwives for the year of the nurse and the midwife. So this was something that was proposed in 2019. It was proposed at the executive board that I mentioned by Jamaica, who was on the board. And then the decision was ratified at the World Health Assembly to have 2020 be the year of the nurse and the midwife. And this was a really exciting opportunity to be able to not just celebrate nurses and midwives, who absolutely warranted celebration, but also a chance to mobilize everyone to expand the evidence base and hopefully stimulate that investment in nurses and midwives, because we know they're the largest portion of the health workforce. So this was all kind of the same movement in terms of investing in the health workforce and to achieve UHC. And that was also what was behind the State of the World's Nursing Report, is to say we needed strong data on the nursing workforce to know where to invest and how to invest. So that was really part of the objectives, which are listed here, was to have a global picture of the nursing workforce. We wanted every country to have a robust data set that described their national nursing workforce, because that data is the basis for having the policy dialogue, deciding what are the key policy actions that need to happen in a country to be able to strengthen primary healthcare and achieve UHC and all that it means. And so we're hoping that having this description of the nursing workforce could unlock that investment, not just at country level, at regional level, at global level, with international financing institutions and all the other big players and stakeholders in health. And we know that we were able to unlock investment. We could drive progress, not just in health, but in education, gender equality, and decent work. So I won't go into the State of the World's Nursing Report findings unless that's an area that you want to dive into later on, but I'll just say that that was the purpose of it, and it relates really closely to the global strategic directions for nursing midwifery, which we will talk about. But what we were really hoping to do with the State of the World's Nursing Report and now the strategic directions is to have that, to have that broad engagement. We have that broad engagement at the country level. That's the basis for having representative, robust data. Because we know the data sometimes is not only at the Ministry of Health, but you have it in different partners like regulatory bodies, education institutions, professional associations, ministries of finance and labor. So this was part of our, what also was the thinking. So from the State of the World's Nursing Report, and if you have the data, you can hold intersectoral policy dialogue on how and where to strengthen nursing, and then you're making evidence-based decisions and commitments, and then you have the investment that can drive the progress on these sustainable development goals, like I mentioned. So the State of the World's Nursing Report, it's, like I said, we won't go into it, but we can. I have slides that would go kind of over all the major findings if you want to talk about that. But there were essentially, all of the key findings and about 20 some policy options in the areas of education, practice, migration, working conditions, pay, regulation, retention, all of those aspects about the nursing workforce. Very importantly, in addition to defining the size and dimensions of the national and regional workforce, we were also able to identify a gap of almost 6 million nurses globally. But those gaps were by far, I think 89% of the gap in the nursing workforce, the shortage was in low and lower middle income countries. And so we are looking at what it would take to fill that gap, and essentially in countries with shortages, it would take an increase in the number of graduates per nurses by about 8% a year at a cost of about $10 per capita through 2030. We were really going to chip away at that gap. So we were able to also articulate some of the big momentum and the big actions that we needed at a global level to fill these gaps. And then also focus on leadership and institutional capacity building to be able to implement the policy guidance that was in the State of the World's Nursing Report. And then you'll see a lot of these same themes in the global strategic directions for nursing and midwifery, carrying them forward. I want to just quickly show from the State of the World's Nursing Report, every country that shared their data, and we had 191 countries with data, we developed a country profile, which is whatever data was shared from the Ministry of Health with WHO for the State of the World's Nursing Report, we put it then on this country profile. And you can see it has some statistics up at the top in terms of just size and development and demographics, and then some of the key nursing data in terms of the number of nursing professionals and broken down between or nursing personnel broken down between professionals and associates, what percent of the nurses are professional nurses, more of a 4-year as opposed to a 2-year, the density by population, the share of nurses within the health workforce. It looks like from the data from State of the World's Nursing Report, which might be a little out of date now, a little over half of the workforce in Indonesia is made up of nurses. And then over on the other side here, some of the questions about education regulation, practice regulation, working conditions, and leadership, because these are some of the key findings within the State of the World's Nursing Report. So just wanted to show you that this is available on the WHO website through our data portal, which I can talk more about later if that's of interest to the students as well. So with this data from the State of the World's Nursing Report, at that 2020 World Health Assembly, the member states were really active in terms of discussing and considering various elements related to the health workforce. And in fact, there was a very high level address by Her Royal Highness Princess Moon Al Hussein of Jordan, who gave an impassioned speech about the nurses and midwives. And then the World Health Assembly, a few days later, they actually, for the very first time, requested WHO to develop the global strategic directions for nursing and midwifery. This had never been requested before. WHO has done the strategic directions for nursing and midwifery before. We've been doing it since 2002, actually. But they'd never been requested by the World Health Assembly. So this was a big deal. And just as a bit of a background about what the strategic directions are, is that they're policy guidance, and they've been intended to help countries ensure that midwives and nurses are able to contribute to the full extent of their ability in terms of achieving population health goals. And they typically have been the target has been health workforce planners, ministries of health, policymakers, but also key stakeholders like education institutions, professional associations, regulators, collaborating centers, all of our key stakeholders across the country. So it's a very important document, and even more so now that it was requested by the Assembly to be considered by the following World Health Assembly. So shortly after that request, by the World Health Assembly, we did a global exercise. I led a global exercise to prioritize the policies for the strategic directions. We held 10 virtual consultations on the draft, one in each region, and then a number of global consultations. We also had email feedback process and a revision process, and then member states. All of the member states were able to review, input, revise to make sure they had it reflected everything that they wanted to. And then it was considered by the World Health Assembly. And when it was being considered, actually, a number of states came forward, again, led by Jamaica, and some countries in WIPRO, that they wanted to adopt it with a resolution, which had also never happened before. And in fact, there had not been a resolution on nursing and midwifery for 10 years. So it was a very momentous occasion. And now that the strategic directions for nursing and midwifery for 2021-2025 have been adopted with the resolution. It's a lot of strong backing. It's a very clear global mandate. All of the member states have agreed to this strategy. And so I think that provides a lot of backing, a lot of traction to move this forward for advocacy and action. So one of the key elements of the strategic directions are that they are primarily based in the evidence from the State of the World's Nursing Report and the State of the World's Midwifery Report. So actually in the document, I'll show you each section has a summary of the key evidence and then the policy priorities for the strategic directions. And I'll just mention that the State of the World's Nursing Report also has country profiles for each country that shared their data, the same as the State of the World's Nursing Report. So those are the two main sources for the strategic directions. And just as an overview of what they are, we call them the strategic directions because there are 4 goals. They're 5-year goals that we call a strategic direction. The goals are in the areas of education, jobs, leadership, and service delivery. And the education, jobs, and leadership, you might remember that's the subtitle of the State of the World's Nursing Report. So under each of these goals, there are between 2 to 4 policy priorities that, if enacted, the logic is if those policy priorities under each goal are enacted, then we can achieve that goal and move along that 5-year horizon. And each policy priority has, I'll just show you the policy priority, but each one has an explanation of what the policy is, why it's important, and what some of the enabling actions are to enact it. And also some resources, the global normative products and guidance that WHO puts out to help countries advance each policy and the key stakeholders to engage. And then there is a monitoring and accountability framework. And each policy has indicators, and the indicators are based on these globally standardized indicators of the health workforce. So we're using, I'll tell you a little bit about implement the monitoring mechanisms in a little bit. But so first I'll go over these 4 areas. So the first area is education. And we saw in the State of the World's Nursing Report and the State of the World's Midwifery Report that there were a number of different levels of programs for nursing, and that those programs had varying levels of quality. And sometimes ensuring the quality was really difficult. So there's a lot of indication that graduates often didn't have the right skills or knowledge or even attitude to provide the services that the population needed. A lot of times there weren't enough graduates. We saw the shortage that I was mentioning. And also that faculty preparation was a key limitation to be able to improve the quality of education and the skills of graduates. And also we had a really difficult time with education data, being able to report the number of graduates, the number of faculty, the number of students, the tuition costs, the expenditure costs. So that was really an area that we saw that countries had a lot of challenges with. So our strategic direction in the area of education, our 5-year goal, is that midwife and nurse graduates match or surpass health system demand, so the number needed by the health system, and they have the requisite knowledges, competencies, and skills and attitudes to meet the national health priorities. So in education, we have 4 policy priorities that we think if we're able to enact and advance these policies, that countries will be able to achieve globally the strategic direction by 2025. So the policies here are to align the levels of nursing midwifery programs with those optimal roles in the health and academic setting. So taking full advantage of the nursing scope of practice, for example, and everything that they could do in a primary healthcare setting. How do you need to then prepare them? And are the education programs now preparing them at that level? Some countries still have nurses coming in, at age 16 before the end of secondary school and doing a 2-year program, and then the role in the health setting isn't the role of a nurse who's prepared, for example, at the bachelor's level. So looking at those programs and evaluating whether or not those graduates meet a key need in the health system. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. The second policy priority is about ensuring the number of graduates, ensuring that you can have enough graduates, and if not, how do you increase those graduates, investing in education to increase the number of graduates. The third policy priority is about education quality, so competency-based curricula, having accreditation standards, and making sure those accreditation standards align with what the population health needs are, and those can be changing. And then the fourth policy priority is about faculty. So investing in faculty development so that they can adequately prepare those graduates to perform in the health systems like they need to. So the second area is jobs, so employment of nurses. And we saw from the State of the World's Nursing Report that there is that shortage of 6 million nurses, and that shortage is not equitably distributed. It's very much in low and lower middle income countries. And that international migration and mobility is a key player in this. We saw in the State of the World's Nursing Report that high income countries have about 15% of their health workforce from other countries. In low and lower middle income countries, it was almost none. So we know that countries are losing nurses to high income countries. So recruitment and retention is almost a universal challenge. Even in high income countries, recruitment and retention is hard. And also the data for being able to understand these key dimensions of the nursing workforce, it was a challenge. So our 5-year goal, our strategic directions for jobs, is to increase the availability of health workers, of nurses and midwives, by sustainably creating nursing midwifery jobs, effectively recruiting and retaining them, and managing international mobility and migration. So there are, again, 4 policy priorities here. One is about conducting nursing midwifery workforce planning using a health labor market lens. So that's understanding the full picture of the inflows of nurses, for example, from graduates from other countries, and the outflows from the nursing labor market, which could be from migration. It could be just leaving nursing to work in other fields, or any number of issues that impact the availability of nurses in the actual health system. The second policy priority is really about creating jobs that demand in the health system with respect to health service delivery, and making sure that there's enough jobs to provide that primary health care and staffing. The third policy priority is about reinforcing the WHO Global Code of Practice on international recruitment of health personnel. This is one of the few legal instruments that WHO is in charge of, and it's a key instrument for ensuring that countries that are that there is mutual benefit from migration. Let's say that one country is not benefiting at the expense of another country. And then the fourth policy priority is to attract, recruit, and retain nurses and midwives where they are needed most. So that's having an understanding of where those key areas are, where nurses and midwives are needed most, and then developing those policies to recruit and retain them. And then the third area is leadership. And we know that there's very well documented gender bias in health leadership. About 70% of health workers are female, but only 25% of the senior posts in the health and care sector are held by women. So that means nurses and midwives are not having an adequate input into health policy decision making. We also saw that only about 70 countries had 70% of responding countries had a government chief nursing and midwifery officer, or 50% only had a government midwifery officer. And that there were even fewer than that, only about 50% of countries, for example, had national nursing leadership development programs. And this is important because we know that when we saw in the State of the World Nursing analysis that when you have a government chief nurse and you have leadership development programs, we saw a much higher proportion of countries that had workplace regulations and education standards in place. So we know there is a positive effect of that nursing leadership. So the strategic direction in leadership is to increase the proportion and authority of midwives and nurses in senior health and academic positions, and to continually develop the next generation of nursing midwifery leaders. So there are 2 policy priorities here. One is to establish and strengthen those senior nursing leadership positions with enough authority and resources and input into health policy. And the second is to invest in national nursing midwifery leadership development programs. So the last area is service delivery. And in this area, we saw that there's really clear evidence systematic reviews, meta-analyses on the effectiveness of nursing and midwifery delivery care, especially in primary health care. But we know that the scope of services that nurses and midwives can provide is often restricted below what they've been educated to do, trained to do. And sometimes it's because that scope of practice is out of date and other regulations are out of date and don't have a really strong regulatory framework that can then enable safe practice, safe from patient safety side, public safety side. So the 5-year goal in service delivery is that midwives and nurses work to the full extent of their education and training in safe and supportive delivery environments. So there are 2 policy priorities here. One is about the professional regulatory framework, so updating that, support, strengthening that. That might be, for example, I mentioned updating the scope of practice. It might also be having a licensure exam. It might be requiring relicensure and requiring continuing professional development for relicensure, that sort of thing, but also looking at harmonization of regulatory framework so that there is a more facilitated mechanism for movement around across jurisdictions. The second area in the policy priority is about workplace, having a safe and supportive workplace so that nurses and midwives can operate to their full potential. So this could mean issues of safe staffing, for example, for the technology, the protection, the PPE, the supports like mental health supports, and also protection from attack and discrimination and gender bias in the workplace. So these are some of the broad policy priorities there. So those are the 12 policy priorities. And again, in the document, the strategic directions document, you can see lots more information about what are some of the key steps, what some of the data looks like to reflect progress in these policies, what the dialogue would be to advance this policy, and some of the key decisions that have to take place in country to advance each of these policies. So I'll talk a little bit about how we see that rolling out, and you'll remember this theory of change from the State of the World's Nursing Report, and it's the same kind of theory of change that we think could happen for any given policy priority. And we would expect that a country who wanted to focus on strengthening the contributions of nurses and midwives to universal health coverage would pick among those 12 policies the ones that are of priority in their country. And then for any given policy priority, it's still, all of them are rooted in a need to have engagement of the key stakeholders in country. So I mentioned education institutions being a key stakeholder and contributor of data, along with regulatory councils, professional bodies, ministries of labor, for example, maybe ministries of finance, if you need to look at payroll and understand how many nurses in the public sector, for example. So that's the type of data. And so for a country wanting to take one of these policy priorities, for example, and advance it, it's important to know what are the indicators for that policy priority and have an understanding of say whether or not you're able to report on those indicators. And if you understand where the data for those indicators lies in country, maybe it's outside of the ministry, like I mentioned, and then collating data from various places, and then using that data for your own analysis and also sharing it with WHO, and then we can produce those global reports like the State of the World's Nursing Report. And the way that we did the State of the World's Nursing Report and the State of the World's Midwifery Report, and the way we report on progress towards universal health coverage in terms of the health workforce is through what we call the NHWA platform. It's the National Health Workforce Accounts platform. And those are the globally standardized indicators on the health workforce. And so we ask countries to then look at those indicators and share their data specifically for nursing and midwifery on those indicators. So that's a key step in countries to be able to advance any one of the policy priorities. And then to have that national level, nationally driven policy dialogue with all the key players identifying what are the key issues with that policy, what are the key issues to address, what are the key steps that need to take, and really relying on that data and the analysis that's been done. And then you can have the evidence-informed decision-making consensus on the way forward and commitments to action, and then the actual policy action or investment in these areas, creating jobs, strengthening education, investing in faculty. Maybe it's developing those leadership programs for nurses. Maybe it's the establishing a chief nurse, for example, in many countries. So, and that we know that type of investment in nurses and midwives can actually drive progress again towards those sustainable development goals. So this is how we think about implementing the strategic direction. So that's also how we think about monitoring the strategic directions. We can see just from the NHWA indicators about that data. So that's how we measure the data piece. And the data is usually reported by the chief nurse in conjunction with the reporting focal point for the NHWA platform, because it is a country-owned software platform that's used. So we can see implementation of the policies through reporting on those standardized indicators. But for the steps of policy dialogue, decision-making, and the actual policy action and investment, we can't see those with those standardized indicators on the policies. For that, we rely on a meeting that WHO holds every 2 years with the government chief nursing and midwifery officers, which is called the Global Forum of what we call GCNMOs, every 2 years. And that is held along with the Triad meeting, which is a meeting with WHO and then all of the national nursing associations who are part of the International Council of Nurses, and all the midwifery associations who are part of the International Confederation of Midwives. So every 2 years, WHO convenes the government chief nurses and chief midwives. And then we have a joint meeting also with the ICM and ICN constituents. So in that period, then we'll be able to understand here a little bit more in detail the actual progress on the dialogue, decision-making, and the policy action, if any. So that's how we'll be tracking every 2 years those pieces. And every year that countries are reporting on the NHWA platform as part of their data sharing on their health workforce for UHC and the SDG 3 anyway. So we're trying not to create new monitoring mechanisms for countries, but to use ways that they already communicate with the WHO about their health workforce. So in summary of the global strategic directions, we're confident that we have 12 policy priorities that are of very high relevance to all countries, and for nursing equally, along with midwifery, and that there is this special opportunity because of the resolution that explicitly asks member states to implement the strategic directions, implement all the policy priorities of relevance in your country. It specifically asks all the partners to contribute to implementation of the strategic directions, and it specifically asks WHO to assist member states in their implementation of the strategic directions. So we have a real strong mandate for everyone to get involved and to advance the strategic directions. And then, as I mentioned, in each country would be the policies of greatest relevance that match with the overall health workforce agenda in country and the overall health plans in country. So that'd be interesting to hear from you all in terms of which of those policy priorities are of the highest relevance, or which ones are things that are already enacted, and which ones are things that are not priorities, and to think about how then that looks in terms of the advocacy in action in Indonesia. And as I mentioned, the approach is something that we've been working on since the State of the World's Nursing Report and the State of the World's Midwifery Report, and the reporting mechanisms are mechanisms that countries are familiar with. So we hope that can also help facilitate faster progress on implementing and reporting on the strategic directions. And a key aspect of that reporting is that if we're having these government chief nurses, we're asking them to report the data every year and every 2 years. That means they need to be familiar with those key indicators of the nursing workforce. So the number of nurses, where they're working, what they're paid, what are their education levels, how many graduates there are, how many faculty. It's a lot of information to get a handle on, but they're all essential for proper management and governance of the nursing workforce. So by supporting chief nurses to be able to have that data and to understand how to use it and analyze it, then we're actually building capacity for chief nurses and strengthening the management of the national nursing workforce. And there are a lot of ways that partners can contribute. We are talking about partners contributing to any one of those 12 policy priorities, or some of our partners are actually contributing in ways of supporting countries to be able to understand the data and report on those indicators. And some of our partners are contributing in terms of supporting policy dialogue, supporting the government efforts to have policy dialogue on these key issues for nursing and midwifery. Our collaborating centers, the Dean mentioned collaborating centers. So we would expect, for example, the terms of reference for the collaborating centers to reflect how they can support countries and regions to advance the strategic direction. So there are lots of ways to contribute. And if we want to talk about what an everyday role for a nurse looks like in the context of this, we can talk about that as well. But I was going to end there and turn it back over for questions, for discussion, or if there's any other areas that you want to kind of veer into, I'm happy to do that as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to you, Professor Yani.
Yes, thank you, Carrie. You have started with the overview of sustainable development goals and universal health coverage, and you use the approach by using the theory of change. I think it's really, to make it the comprehensive thing may be able to be simplified. And yes, and there's some questions in English in Bahasa Indonesia that in the chat, so I'll try to get it for you. The first question is from Imelda. Actually, she's asking about what of each country might not have the same adequacy of resources to implement the strategy. Would WHO give a support on that? Or is there any roles of WHO to help the countries who is scarce of resources? That one thing. And her second question is about the education, nursing education. Is there any international standard from WHO for nursing educations?
Great questions. I'm looking for a pen, so
oh yeah,
so I can write them down. Dr. Yani,
you can read in the chat, Ro.
Okay. No, I can remember those two.
Yeah,
so
okay.
It's a great question, and I realize I didn't have a slide on what WHO is doing. So we every 2 years we develop our work plan, basically, and we have a process to develop this work plan for the headquarters, the regional offices, and each of the country offices. And so I've actually been assembling the 3-level plan for implementing the strategic directions. And so getting a sense of what headquarters will do, what the regional offices will do, and what the country offices, what they're telling us what they plan to do, and how we can support them. So how it typically works is that the country office has their plans and what they do, knowing the country very well. And then if they want to engage the regional office in support of specific activities, then they work with the regional offices who do most of the technical assistance in countries, if the country office requests that. And then also WHO as well can be asked to headquarters then can also support as needed. I can speak from the headquarters level. What our main role is to develop that policy guidance, develop the normative work, develop the evidence, and then the evidence-informed policy options. So we produce those for every policy priority in there. There is guidance, there's a resource, there's a global public health good to support countries. So for example, in that very first policy priority about planning your nursing workforce through this health labor market approach, we have a health labor market analysis toolkit. The regional offices do webinars and trainings and actually work in country directly with doing that health labor market assessment. One of the policy priorities in education is to have competency-based curricula and accreditation standards. So we have a brand new guidance on how to have a education that is competency-based education, how to develop competency-based education for universal health coverage. So that's another example. But another thing we do is from headquarters is we work, we hold the GCNMO forum, this every 2 years, this forum with the government chief nurses, so that we can target these key areas that countries are saying they want support in, and we work directly with those government chief nurses to make them to build capacity where needed. And then we also have another mechanism at the global level, which is kind of ongoing support. That meeting that we used to have every 2 years in person, we now hold virtually. And so we hold it virtually, and we dive into all these topics and understand what support countries need and chief nurses need. And we do a lot of content in those areas. But now we have an ongoing virtual platform that our chief nurse is leading, Elizabeth Iro. And so now we have a mechanism through which we're engaging chief nurses and doing capacity building in each of these areas. But the priority really has to be set by the country that and then the country connects with the WHO office in country, and there are then resources you can tap from any level of country office, regional office, or global office. So there are other ways through which WHO engages with countries, but those are especially on human resources for health. But those are the main ways for supporting this. And also, I think through the monitoring process that we'll do, we can also see where countries are lagging behind and offer that support where they've requested it. And then on education, Professor Yanni, would you remind me the focus of that question?
Yes, the education, whether there is an international standard.
Yeah, so we in terms of education,
right? Yeah.
Yes, I think I saw it too, on the message. So for education, the standards that we have are, we have some guidance on educator competencies for nursing educators, for midwifery educators. The newest, we do have the newest support for education is what I mentioned as the global competency framework for universal health coverage. So this doesn't set specific standards, for example, that might be at a national level or a regional level. But these give guidance in terms of how do you develop those programs so that any health workforce program has the right competencies and the right skills, and how you define the skills and the competencies, and then build a program around that, kind of working backwards from the expected roles in the health settings, and then working backwards. Another piece of guidance is that we're coming out with right now on education is integrating the social determinants of health, for example, in health worker curricula, and that really focuses also on climate change as impacting and a lot of the social determinants of health. So that's another piece that's coming out that will seek to enhance the relevance of health worker education, including for nurses and midwives.
So in terms of what you have explained, then another question is related to the leveling of nursing educations. Is there any standard of leveling? It means that the roles of the nurses at different level of educational preparations for them to work at the primary care or primary health care,
right,
to achieve the universal health coverage.
Right. Yeah, that's a great example, I think, of that whole process of the data dialogue and decision making, because I think it takes that understanding of what levels nurses are graduating at,
qualification framework.
Right, and then thinking in the health sector, are nurses what are their roles? Are those roles different for the graduates of those different programs? And if they, in the policy dialogue, thinking about if you can articulate what is that key role for a nurse? What would you expect nurses to contribute in an interdisciplinary team? And thinking, well, are the graduates coming from these programs working in those roles? And if not, how do the education programs need to be changed? And are the levels of graduates is there a key role for each of those graduates on these teams, and are they working to the highest of their ability? Because we do say, that we want all health workers working to the top of their scope, and that will give us an optimal skill mix if every health worker is working to the top of their scope. So thinking of the different graduates of the different programs, are they working to the top of their scope, and are they making key contributions in an efficient and interdisciplinary teams? And if not, then maybe those need to be changed. For example, if an associate nurse, so maybe a graduate from a 2-year program, actually isn't being utilized in that role, if they're actually doing lower roles, for example, than they're able to do. I mean, I think we can look back and say, do we need to bring that level up, or does that role of nurse have an absolutely key role to play, for example, in the community, in the health center, in the health service facilities? It's different in every country, and these different programs and graduate nurses that absolutely contribute, but it's a matter of that country deciding, are they working to the top of their scope, and are they, and if not, then you might look at changing those levels of programs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In Indonesia, we have what is called collegium. The collegium developed the standard for at national level, national standard for nursing education. So then we have the standard of competencies of each level, actually. But then when it come up to, to dispatch them, to make them in jobs, working, sometimes it needs to be more arranged, the different roles of each level. So that's the situation. Yes, and then thank you, Carrie, for your answer. Do you have also the mental health program at WHO for children? It is under UNICEF, or it's also covered by WHO?
WHO, there are a number of supports and documents coming out about mental health. I think especially the COVID pandemic has really highlighted how important mental health is, especially in this time and of health workers. So there are a number of resources on our website in terms of that. For specific child mental health, I think that might be our partner organization, sister agency with UNICEF, but that is a priority. Mental health itself is a priority area of WHO, and so there are key resources that are available now, and even ones that are coming out in the context of supporting health workers in COVID-19. So I think those are available on our website. But for the specific ones about child mental health, I'm not as well versed in those.
Okay, thank you. And this is about the nursing workforce. Have you observed some countries that they place the nurses who is not professional, or maybe they are professional in the country, but they are downgrades the professionalism, the qualifications of the nurses coming from original country or to the host countries. Is there any observations that you notice?
Oh, do you mean the situation where, say, you're a registered nurse in one country and then you migrate to work in another country?
As a registered nurse in another country.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a big challenge in terms of being able to even the receiving country being able to recognize those credentials and then grant the credentials in the receiving country. So that we have, that is well documented. in the evidence. And so in the State of the World's Nursing Report and the strategic directions, we talk about as part of the regulatory frameworks and the ability of, it's often the regulatory council to be able to verify and recognize those credentials of a nurse coming from another country. And a lot of times it's difficult because there, as we've talked about, there are the education standards are set at the national level. The titles even are different and set at the national level. And it takes resources to be able to go and verify and check. So there are a lot of regions or sub-regions even, I should say only sub-regions, that have harmonized regulations so that nurses can move with a little less of that sort of paperwork process to verify credentials. And so if there are education standards that are harmonized, if there are licensing standards that are harmonized, definitions and titles that are harmonized, then it's a little bit easier. Some of that requires data systems that can talk to each other, which is difficult. But if you're able to verify credentials of a nurse because you're all using an interoperable data set or a minimum data set about those things, then that can make it easier to verify a nurse's credentials and then have him or her work at the appropriate level. Otherwise, I think there's definitely a bottleneck there, and nurses are working below the level that they might work in their own country, and that's a loss. That's not optimal skill mix, like we talked about. That's not working to your full potential, and we do think that that nurses and midwives working to their full potential is essential for achieving UHC and strengthening primary healthcare, especially because we know that all of the roles that nurses can take on in primary healthcare settings and how effective the services by nurses working to their full scope in PHC settings is. So that's a key area that we put in the strategic directions and a number of policy options in the State of the World's Nursing Report too.
Yes. Oh, well, yes. The other questions, I think it's something to do with the impact of pandemic. As you know, that a lot of the appointment made for telemedicine, but not telenursing. The virtual services.
Yeah.
Is it really nursing cannot use that technology, or because nursing needs to have a human touch to the bedside? Yeah, why is it always telemedicine, not telenursing? Do you have any observation on this?
No, I think
it's a question from Harry. Yeah.
Okay, I think it varies by country. I mean, I think there are countries that have nurses providing virtual care. I mean, I think it's an issue, I think, of the supports. I think and by supports I also mean protection of the public, like the function of regulations. So I think it's a matter of having the resources for technology, also having the resources in terms of the competency of the nurses to be able to do a new way of providing care. And so the question is, are they prepared to do that, either through education or graduates, if that's going to be a role of nurses in the health system? How are they prepared to do that? Are they prepared in education settings to provide that virtual care? And many now, I think probably students in nursing schools are. But if not, then there's training that nurses need to be able to undergo to make sure they're competent in providing the virtual care. And then there's also an interesting question about the jurisdiction again. So the regulations, do they need to be different regulations to allow nurses to have this different aspect to their scope of practice, to doing virtual care, and then also even where they do that virtual care? Would they be doing it to patients in other countries? And that's also that licensure and reciprocity, I think, of titles and scopes and stuff too. So it all gets back to, I think, that education, regulation, and the safety and preparation of nurses to provide those services.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone has said that nurses are not able to provide those telehealth services. I think you just have to have the
Yes.
adequate preparation, training, and regulatory supports.
Yeah, like giving consultations, counseling, this all the nurses' roles. Yes.
Mhm.
Well, I think this is the time for direct questions.
Sure.
This question all from the doctoral students who are assigned to have this course on policies development. Yes.
Great. Yeah,
So
they're great questions.
please, Yemi, could you help me to look at whether they are raised hand?
Okay, Prof.
There is no.
Actually, not yet, Prof. I think that's only the question that they deliver in the
chat.
column.
Yeah.
Yes.
In the chat. Okay.
I see some of them now. If you'd like,
Yeah.
let's see. Here's one about the 10 virtual consultations. What's the strategy? Virtual services. Maybe the people who put the questions could ask them directly if I haven't answered them.
What his name? Yes. Siapa yang tulis di chat, please? Who wrote in the chat? You can raise your hand to.
Let's see.
To give a direct questions to Dr. Carey.
Here's one from Dita. It says, since 2015, Indonesia no longer has a directorate of nursing at the Ministry of Health. What is your opinion about this situation? How can we restore the directorate? So I think there are a lot of countries that don't have a chief nurse or a directorate of nursing even. So I think, in the strategic directions, we clearly have a policy that says to establish or strengthen those senior nursing roles in the government and academic settings. So you do have that backing there. But I think, obviously, we do believe in that process of the data dialogue and decision making. So I think, Dr. Yanni, do you remember in the session, the WHO session at the ICN Congress, we had a speaker who from the Philippines who was talking about what it took in the Philippines to be able to establish that chief nurse position. They have a bill right now, a new nursing act in their parliament, and it has a chief nursing role. And he described what it took in terms of what was the nursing workforce data for the Philippines that had to be that they needed to have. And then they had this policy dialogue with some of that evidence and talked about what would that key role for the chief nurse be? What difference would that role make? What are some of the essential things that role would help effect in terms of the policy priorities in the country? And then they had to also do that policy dialogue really broadly in terms of talking about with each of the different ministries, even like where the funding for the chief nurse would be, what that role would be, and really working across different ministries, across different stakeholders to get the support behind that chief nurse role. And then it was able to go into some of the early policy documents that went through the House and then kind of to their Senate and that sort of thing. So I think for Indonesia, it would really be determined by you all in country and what's the argument for the chief nurse and who are the key people to involve in the policy dialogue, and how do you push for that policy dialogue and that action based on the evidence and the arguments for a chief nurse.
Well, actually we had Directorate of Nursing Service before, since the year of 2000s until 2015, and then with the new organizational structures, it was demolished. There is no more Directorate of Nursing. But now we are working hard, since we already have Indonesian nurse at the parliament as a legislator.
Oh, great! Yes,
national level. So through him and his colleagues at the parliaments, we might have a hope, to bring it back. Yeah.
Right, and that was part of the example from the Philippines. Also, is they had a key chief in the ministry, high up in the ministry, who also was supportive of that.
We used to have it before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's so painful. That's why I didn't want to read it for you. Because I was the one,
No, we talk
taking
about it a
part
lot.
of having this directorate. And
Right. I was just speaking with the Norwegian Nurses Association, and that's one of their key issues as well. If for Norway, for example, is to establish that chief nursing position. So lots of countries are really working at it now. So it's a common kind of issue. That's why we put it in the strategic directions. And in the strategic directions, we do articulate what that role should be, what the resources should be, and the benefits of having that role. So I hope that will be of use to all countries who are trying to advance that
Yes.
policy.
Yes, Carrie.
There is a participant who are raised hand.
Yes, ada. Oh yeah, Imelda.
Imelda Rito nggak, Prof?
Yes. Okay. Actually, okay. Can you hold Imelda? I have one question to take from the chat. Okay. Yeah, Carrie. There is a questions about why the qualification. It's something to do with the nurse migrations,
Okay.
So each country, they set different qualifications. Is there no cross countries standard for qualifications?
There are some good examples of cross-country qualifications, and some of this is in the State of the World's Nursing Report. They're all at this sub-regional level. So, for example, in the Caribbean, a lot of the Caribbean countries, they have a common licensure exam. They have common licensure standards. They have common education standards, and there's a body, the regional nursing body, that gets together every couple of years and sets, for example, the licensure exam, so that you know that wherever a nurse from the Caribbean is from, they all have the same initial competencies because they at least have the same minimum competencies because they have all passed the same licensure test to be, for example, a registered nurse. In the area, there's a Southeast Asian mutual recognition agreement for nurses, so that nurses moving in a certain number, I forgot how many countries, they can move around this sub-region of Southeast Asia to because they agree to recognize each other's qualifications based on an understanding of what all the education standards are, what the licensure standards are, and that sort of thing. They've also done it in Europe. They have agreed on the education standards for nurses in Europe, so that they can also be recognized moving around different countries within Europe. So there are models out there for this either mutual recognition or joint cross-country licensure exams and those sort of things. So there are models out there. And I think that the more that we can actually get those models on a bigger scale, I think the easier it will be to move. And we also have to make sure that it stays safe to move. So that's those pieces of it takes infrastructure, it takes regulations, it takes infrastructure in terms of data and data systems to be able to see a nurse in a system and understand where he or she was educated and verify those credentials. So it takes a lot of input, but it can be done. And I think there's the harmonizing the standards part, but there's also the infrastructure piece as well.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Imelda, your turn. That was the answer for Jatu, right? Yeah, Imelda.
Good evening, Miss Kathy. I just wondering, Miss Kathy, a few years ago, I follow one of WHO delegation to North Sumatra. He wants to know about mortality death in North Sumatra and how we do the how the standard from government to take care of the problem. I just wondering how the data come to WHO to make some support to Indonesia maybe, because after the the event or when I follow this WHO, I think there's nothing nothing happened in my region about the mortality, maternal mortality rates, and also the TB, the problem in TB. Also, I follow one of the WHO delegations, and I have to take the data. After that, after 2019, the program also stopped from WHO. What is the standard actually all from the WHO to do the program to the country who needs the support? What is the actually the criteria that the program is success or not success? Thank you. Hopefully you can understand my question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, your English was great. Absolutely. So I think, unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to speak to that, and especially your experience at the country level. I think the country office of WHO works directly with the ministry. Works in close collaboration with the ministry. So I think, for example, whichever program you were on or visiting was probably with the ministry, working with the WHO country office. And so I think those levels of questions about kind of the TB and the maternal mortality activities at country would be better answered by that level, because I'm just not I'm not familiar, and those areas are aspects outside of what I work on. So I'm really not familiar with any standards, even if there are global standards for or thresholds for that I'm just not aware. I'm in the health workforce department, so really working on ensuring that countries have the adequate number and preparation of health workers and the data systems and supports that are needed to ensure that health workers provide that minimum level of services at a minimum. But in terms of the specifics about TB and maternal mortality, I'm sorry, I can't answer that, but I would it would be a better, someone at the WHO office there, or even the regional level would be able to answer that. And there is a regional person focused on nursing and midwifery, based in Manila, I believe. But there are regional focal persons like me at the headquarters level, at the regional level. So I can also share that information with Professor Yanni if there's someone wants to reach out, and be in touch.
Yeah. Well,
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, while the time is approaching, it's almost 8:30.
Yeah.
Carrie, we are so grateful to have you with us.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and it's really, and I'm so glad that so many questions coming from my class.
Yes, great questions.
Yes, the health policy class. And also that the main thing is very important is the approach used in your SDNM is about the theory of change, how you start from broad engagement, data, and use the data for dialogue, and then decision making, and then investment. So I think it is actually like a cycle, right? It is not only toward up there, but then from investment you can go back giving an input again, right?
Right, exactly. And monitoring how that investment has changed or impacted.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to adapt my model, Professor Yanni.
Yes, it is. So these the 4 goals. Is it you set it goals, or is it areas? Something.
Yeah, there is the global strategic directions. They're called that because we have a strategic direction for each of the 4 areas, and the strategic direction articulates a 5-year goal. Exactly.
Education, jobs, leadership, and service delivery.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is the time for us to end the question and answers, and also the the lectures that they have given us. I think we have learned a lot. Then hope that we will be able to learn again from you one day.
Yeah, I'd
Thank
be
you
happy to
so
come back.
much. Yeah. So I give,
Thank you.
yes, I hand it over to Miss Yelmi Reni Putri.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Well, thank you for the great sharing that we received this evening. It's really great time to be with Dr. Kerry and the moderator, our dear professor.
Cannot believe
So,
it times went so fast.
Before we end this meeting, we invite our proud speaker to receive a certificate of appreciation regarding to this event. This certificate will deliver
Like this?
by, that will deliver by Dean Faculty of Nursing.
Oh, it's
Mr. Agus
beautiful.
Setiawan, please.
Thank you. Thank you. It's beautiful. I'm very honored.
Thank you
This is
very
very
much, Dr. Kerry. We are very grateful to have you with us.
Thank you, Dean Agus, as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Agus.
Yes,
Our
thank you
dear.
very much.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the end of this event. On behalf of the host and the committee, I would like to extend once again our deepest appreciation to you all for your support and participation on this guest lecture event. Thank you, good evening and good morning. As a master of ceremony, I ask and apologize if any mistake and inconvenience. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
See you next
Thank you,
time.
Carrie. Good morning,
Thank you,
Carrie.
Dr.
Nice
Kerry.
meeting
Thank
you.
you.
It's an honor.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Keep healthy. We'll meet again tomorrow. Bye. Thank you. Makasih Pak Iwan.
Makasih Prof Yani.
Makasih semuanya.
Terima kasih,
Makasih
Pak
para
Agus.
mahasiswa. Mahasiswa yang
Makasih,
hadir,
Prof.
para alumni